Hello, John Terrell here. Pull a chair up to the fireside at Chateau Cube, where we discuss life, limited magic, and cube draft. Today, Thomas Krone joins us, whom you may know as the organizer of the Cubevitational competitive cube event. Thomas has, to his knowledge, the first cube in the Netherlands, which he began in 2007. In 2010, he launched what is, to my knowledge, the longest-running cube event anywhere. The annual Cubevitational Tournament Series boasts 24 qualifying events that happen over the course of a year in a few different cities in the Netherlands, culminating in a big final event in Amsterdam. Thomas is forever tinkering with his powered 720-card Cubevitational environment, and he maintains a number of other cubes, such as a one-drop cube, a zombie cube, and a Star Wars cube. In fact, I've spared you the geeking out that Thomas and I did about Star Wars and Star Trek at the beginning of our conversation, and I pick things up as we settle into Cube Talk. I am delighted to welcome Thomas Krone to Chateau Cube.
I must say, I really liked your focus approach. For me, that was probably your best episode because it was so cleanly laid out. Now, I'm always more of a, so what kind of day is it drafter? I can actually go into a draft thinking, oh, today I'm just going to pick all the Gruul cards, and then I will just actually do it instead of really looking at the first pack. But that's sort of a result how I approach cubing, I think. Sort of probably Timmy-esque, where I perform a certain update. I mean, I don't test. For me, an update is the test. And then after a couple of drafts, if something sticks, then it passed. So I want to actively draft certain cards that I put in, and that will result in me just forcing archetypes on any given evening.
Right. Well, that makes perfect sense for sure. The focus thing, it is, as you're intimating, I think, meant to be a kind of roadmap for somebody who's really looking to spike a draft, not necessarily for somebody who's just looking to have fun or for somebody who has very well-defined predilections and feels like they're a Gruul drafter and that's just what they want to do. Or when you're testing, I do precisely the same thing. When I introduce a bunch of new cards, I want to play with those cards, darn it. And I want to see what other people do with them, of course, but I also want to do what I envision they're going to do or they're going to be good for. So I'll certainly force new cards as well. So I'm totally with you.
I might, because my cube is double size, I will occasionally seed cards for new drafts, so sort of to make sure that we're going to see the new cards. I have not done the method where you just build a deck with a new card in it, just to play a game with it, to see how it performs. I mean, aside from actual drafting, when you just take your cube out and you say, okay, a deck that would like this card would look sort of like this. Something I've never made time for or made the effort to, even though the method sounds really good.
You know what I did with Eldraine? It made a lot of sense there because Eldraine was such a deep set for cube curators. Was a few times my play group and I didn't introduce any of the Eldraine cards into my cube. We drafted like the old version of my cube as normal. And then after the draft was over, we had a rule that everybody could pick 3 cards from the pool of Eldraine cards that were possible introductions. You know, it was just a friendly thing. I mean, we recognized that we were sort of bastardizing the rules of how one drafts. So, you know, we didn't make a big deal about priority for who gets what, but we just kind of worked it out. And then everybody just put those 3 cards in their pool and built their decks and included those cards or didn't include those cards. But the idea was we would try to give some additional weight to including those cards in our decks. Anyway, that was fun, and that was a good way of making sure we got to play with some new cards.
Because you were looking at like 30 plus cards, right, for Eldraine?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we talked about this on Twitter, and I don't remember what the count was, but it was crazy. It was like, I don't know, 30, 38.
It just kept going up and up because for me, I'm a typical good cards cuber. You look at Eldraine and then you see 10 cards when you immediately spot the power level. It's sort of because we've been doing it for 10 plus years where you sort of, okay, these are the highlights. And I think we got to 30 plus because you kept finding all these niche cards who would outperform cards you already had in the same slot. I'm not using an example. I'm just saying card X. Hey, and I know we skimmed over card card X at first, but isn't this a lot better than this card Z that we're already running? And that's why this just got so big. And most of them are still in.
Yeah, I guess I could see how many I'm still running, but it is a ton. So in my 450 card cube, I've got 24 currently Eldraine cards. So that's a ton.
Which is a lot, yeah.
It is. It really is. I don't know. I'm not going to go through set by set right now and figure it out, but I feel like I can state with some confidence that Eldraine is by far and away the most represented set in the cube. Adventure was such a good mechanic. It was an interesting way of doing something different with modal spells.
Yeah. And that's just what I'm looking for, because some sets, I mean, like Kaladesh with the energy, it's so self-contained, and adventures are just wide open.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at your cube now.
Yeah,
You've
it's
got,
28.
it looks like 27. Oh, 28. Okay,
Yeah,
nice.
because Eldraine and Eldraine Collector are different boxes you need to tick.
Oh, really? Okay.
So there's one collector
Right.
in there somewhere. I'm not even sure which one. Yeah, it's Garruk. Do you say Garruk in English?
Oh man, I say Garruk, but I know people say it differently, so I won't swear that I'm correct. I say Garruk.
I know it's sort of a hot topic.
All right. Yeah, it's a hot topic and one that I don't have much personal investment in, I gotta say.
Now, basically, in Dutch, it reads as Garruk,
Uh-huh. Okay. Right.
and then we use the English G. So I think most of the Dutchies would call it Garruk, but I'm actually completely convinced right now it should be Garruk.
Okay. Good. Are there Dutch printings of Magic cards or no?
No. Did have first edition Dutch Pokemon, but that's
Oh, really?
yeah,
Oh.
strange. Huh?
Let's play a little game whereby we roll some d6s. I'll roll a d6 for color, and then if you would, you roll a d6 for CMC,
Okay.
and then let's each pick a card that we want to highlight that we think is, I don't know, interesting in some way, either from our cube or from cube in general. Okay. Oh, 6. All right. So this is going to be multicolored and colorless.
Okay. So we sort of have a choice.
We have a choice, yeah.
Or do you roll odds or even now to define multicolor or colorless?
Why don't you roll? You roll odd or even for us and pick.
Okay, let's see. Okay, you have a solid 1.
Okay, so gold cards?
Sure.
Awesome. Can you roll a d10? This is becoming harder and harder. Roll a d10 for guild. How's that?
Guild 4.
Guild 4, which is Gruul.
Ooh. So and the CMC was? Or didn't
Oh,
we
it
do
doesn't matter, I think.
CMC yet?
No, we didn't anymore. We didn't. Let's just go. Interesting Gruul card.
I think it's actually an interesting one to roll. I think I tried a lot of things over the years to sort of give more options than the standard beatdown cards. I think big ones I can remember are Rurik Thar, which sort of never really stuck. There's one I kept in really, really long, Clan Defiance, which I find really interesting. Also because I have a complete Timmy story about it, where someone could hit all 3 targets and then proceed to win the game. It was, if you have an experience like that, at least for me, then a card is sort of amazing for forever.
Well, we should explain the cards a little bit.
Yeah.
So Rurik Thar, he's a 6-drop in Gruul. He's a 6/6 vigilance reach. He has to attack each combat if able. And then the big pull towards this card is whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, Rurik Thar deals 6 damage to that player. So he's real good at punishing spell-heavy decks. He's a fine foil to controlling strategies, of course. But also he's a 6-drop.
You immediately highlight the things that drew me in at first. For me, the main reason why it never really stuck was that if you have a deck that could run this, then you're almost always not these 2 colors, and it's sort of, I mean, it got picked by people playing the sort of Jundish control deck. It lurked in the sideboard, or it didn't really actually get played, and then people had a sort of not real experience with it, and then it sort of got sidelined. Did you try it at any point, or is it in right now?
It's not in right now. I did try it briefly. I felt like it didn't do enough for a 6-drop. If the knobs had been tweaked, I could totally see the card being worthwhile. If it cost 5, maybe. If it had trample for sure,
Yeah.
would have been a big help, because otherwise it's just this big dumb brute who keeps walking into, soldier tokens or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
But, dealing 6 damage, that is a big gain. But often he would, well, firstly, he didn't make it in many main decks, as you
Yeah.
point out. But when he did, he'd eat a Doomblade or something, and a person would take 6. That's a lot of damage, but then also you just die.
Yeah, it sort of felt like the wrong side of a Punisher mechanic, where you never really get what you wanted.
I agree entirely. But he's a super interesting card, and I can totally see building Gruul around that kind of Punisher effect. We're punishing people for casting on creature spells.
I wanted to not forget that we mentioned Clan Defiance.
Why don't you tell us what Clan Defiance does?
Clan Defiance is an X red-green sorcery, and you can choose one or more modes of 3, where you deal X damage to target creature with flying, X damage to target creature without flying, and or X damage to target player. I think I had this in from the day it was printed.
It was from Return to Ravnica block, I think, right?
Yeah, that's because I had a really shallow Gruul section at that time, and a shallow I mean not numbers wise, but function wise. And I've bane fired many people out, so I can respect a good X spell.
Right.
And I think immediately the thing happened that I thought, where somebody could take out 2 creatures that were troublesome and do some face damage, and then just proceed to win the game from there. I mean, I think it was even a Clan Defiance where X was 3, and it just showed its versatility. I'm looking at the Gruul section now to see what I actually cut for it. I think I cut it for Spellbreaker, Gruul Spellbreaker, to try it out. Talking about forcing Gruul earlier, and that was a card I was expecting more. I think from what it did, I would rather have the hybrid mana wither guy. It's not battering ram, but it's Gruul ram gang.
Yeah, I never actually tried Spellbreaker, but I could see trying it for sure. It's either big or fast.
I know for some reason I thought that the third line of text, as long as it's your turn, you and Gruul Spellbreaker have hexproof. For some reason, I thought that would actually do something. But in all the games I played with it, it was just flavor text.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, if it said as long as it's not your turn, that seems better, because then you're dodging the sorcery speed removal, obviously.
The last evening I played with it, and actually every time I cast Gruul Spellbreaker, what I thought all the time was, if only this was a buggered ram gang. It's a 3/3 haste wither. Looking at what we rolled, is there any other Gruul cards you would like to highlight that maybe one that I'm not running?
Yeah, I'll pick a Gruul card. We got a number of planeswalkers that are good in Gruul these days, but I think slightly more off the beaten path Gruul card I like is Assault and Battery. It's a split card. Both halves are a sorcery, and for a single red, you deal 2 damage to any target. For 3 and a green, on the other half, you make a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So I like this card quite a bit because I like redundant burn effects a lot. I think red needs all the burn it can get its hands on that comes at a good rate. So even though it's sorcery speed and 2 damage, that doesn't sound awesome, and it's not awesome. But then you've got the versatility of also being able to make the Kill Giant for 4 mana. And there's a world in which this card can be run outside of Gruul decks. I've put it in red decks, for instance, for just the front half of the card. Anyway, that's a techier Gruul card that I like.
It's a typical split card in the sense that they're sort of both halves are slightly above rate. Only just slightly, but you get the reward that you get is the choice.
I've talked elsewhere about the green mid-range deck that I try to support. Battery, the other half of that makes the elephant, it sort of fits into that, but it's not amazing because I like better the other versions of similar effects that allow you to make multiple creatures, like Call of the Herd, for instance. It makes the green elephant for 2 and a green, and then it has flashback for 3 and a green, which is the battery cost.
Yeah, I think I've also had that in forever. Maybe it's a leftover from old standards where you have a sort of prejudice for a certain card. So, where you can never look at a card through another lens aside from that it's good. Took a really long time. I'm not saying that people should cut it or should include it, but for me, even though I ran it for really long, it was always somewhere on a part of a chopping block.
I totally understand that. And obviously it depends on one's goals, whether or not the card makes any sense. I've built cubes where I've drained green of mid-range almost entirely. The green curve looks like a whole bunch of elves on the bottom and then a whole bunch of big thick creatures up top and very little from like 3 to 5 mana. But then I've also built versions of green that really lean into mid-range and still have all those elves, but then lose a lot of that top range, at least insofar as castable creatures go. So the biggest stuff is intended to be cheat targets and not ramp targets. And then I've got all this mid range. So
It sort of touches on one of my main fears about cube design or overhauling cubes. I've had my cube for 12 and a half years now. I got into cubing around Lorwyn just before, because I remember the commands were one of the first major updates that I did. I got into it because I saw an Evan Irwin's magic show about the cube, and it was a time where I stopped playing standard and I stopped playing kitchen table because I've sort of been playing with the same four guys, and the games were always the same.
right.
Even though they were my old high school buddies, I said, look, guys, I love playing Magic and I love playing with you guys, just not these same games anymore. I think two of them actually joined going to Monday night drafts. During RGD, Ravnica Guild Pact Descension, old Ravnica. And just around that time, I saw this YouTube episode, and then, of course, you see the light, and you say, "Well, I like draft. I've been drafting for 2 years now. I have all these cards, so I just immediately started building." Cards pulled from long boxes, cards that I liked. I actually found a list from 2009.
Oh, did you? Oh,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah, it's hilarious because it has like 3 1-drops in white and one is in Isamaru.
Right.
Because
Well, it's still a good one drop in white.
yeah. Well, aside from the fact that I drafted mostly curve decks in regular limited, I had no idea what I was doing on the design end. But it's also not how Cube was sort of, let's say, marketed at that point
Yeah.
by Evan. So that whole aspect of design was left up to the creator. So it was a complete mid-range fest that was updated over time with input from the local Amsterdam draft scene. And at the time we drafted in was used to be, or sometimes still is, the hotbed for Dutch limited Magic. Former world champion Julian Nuiten used to play there, and some really other old school guys like Noah Boeken, also Bram Snapvanger. So that's it. What I mean to say is that there was a lot of good feedback about why isn't this card in and why isn't that card in. And then my main reason was, well, I didn't own those cards, so that's the only reason why they were not considered. I think I started around 360 cards, and then it just grew over time because I got tired of being able to write down people's deck lists after turn 3, because I was the only player in every cube draft because I ran it, and I think I had the first cube there. People were catching on, say, oh, somebody has a cube, so that's why the email list grew so rapidly. And I saw a lot of different faces, and they were trying new things and giving advice about missing cards. So I think in the first 2 years it went really fast.
So there wasn't enough variance at 360 cards. You felt like the format was stale, even though the players might have been rotating pretty frequently.
Yeah. But that's also because for me, being in every draft, it just got stale fast. The reason I went all the way up to 720 cards is because I wanted to run 16-player events. I think that I could get the variance that I want at a lower number, maybe even 600. I would dislike the hassle from having to scale up to 720 when you run the 16-man draft. So that's why I tried to run it all in 720. The reason that I thought about it is what you named, where you try to build a cube with the entire mid-range for green missing as a starting point. I never looked at my cube that way from the ground up at 0 cards. I mean, once I caught on to the 1 and 2 drops needing to be the biggest section to have a normal draft environment, I always had sort of that wedge-shaped curve where you have like 10 1-drops and 1 or 2 8-drops to sort of generalize, and then it sort of wedges down.
So at 720, if I can ask you a little bit more about that, 720 allows you to run 16-person drafts, as you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and it dramatically increases variance.
Mm-hmm.
I can see those advantages that you're highlighting here, including increasing variance. I can totally see it might be desirable for many people. I've moved up from 360 to 450 in my main cube just to add a little more mystery to the draft, but while keeping variance relatively low.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at your list, I think this is true that you don't support a lot of super narrow archetypes like Storm, for instance, that requires really particular sets of cards to make it tick. For me, the biggest disadvantage to larger sizes like 720 and bigger is that it becomes increasingly hard to attain an adequate density of desirable effects. So I wonder how you've navigated that.
I think that I still have a few traps because I'm at 720. I have new players come in who first pick an Entomb thinking they can draft a hyper combo reanimator deck, and it's just not there. And I don't think it's possible at 720 without making some huge sacrifices. For me, reanimate type cards, it's not a deck type, it's sort of an angle the control decks get in my cube. Where if the opponent manages to remove the game-winning fatty, that you just get it again for 2 mana with an animate dead or something, right? I think that's what's one of the main pitfalls with new players in my cube. Is it's definitely a learn to draft it environment where some cards don't have the value that they think they have, and sometimes I do worry about it. Maybe I should overhaul and have a more archetype-driven cube. I stop myself because I say no, that's not what I like about cube.
Yeah, that's not what you're trying to do. Yeah, fair enough. No, and I'm not trying to say that you're wrong at all.
I think it's okay for not every deck to get there every time. And I think that's also part of the story and the experience. I wouldn't want to draft a cube on a monthly basis, on a bi-weekly basis where everybody gets everything all the time. I mean, I would like it once or twice, and then I would go back to having a sort of can I get there environment. The finals of the last Cubevitational were a big strike against this approach, at least at a powered level, because it was a long day. We had 4 drafts and 12 rounds, and the decider of the final was basically just Black Lotus win. Of course, it wasn't that black and white, but the current champion went first turn Oracle with it, Oracle of Moldaya. Basically, the game was just lost. So, of course, it depended on the draw that the opponent had, and there's a lot of more factors, but it did give a bit of feel bad. So I would definitely 100% remove power, at least for the finals. I think it's okay for somebody to spike a qualifier because you got all the power, but I don't think it's okay for somebody to win a long and tiring tournament. I should reverse it. I think it's unfun for someone to lose a long and tiring tournament because somebody got all their power.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me, especially when we're talking about powered environments. It can be hard, the larger the cube size, can feel sort of more chancy and feel more like you get lucky or you don't get lucky when you win the power lottery. I know people address this in different ways. Like, I've got a friend who runs, I don't even think he runs a 720 card cube, and maybe it's a 540 or something, but he runs 2 of each power component. He's got 2 Black Lotuses and, 2 of each Moxen and so on. He just wants to maximize people's opportunity to open those cards. But then also that's doing different things to the environment. And when you're playing power, you're playing blistering fast magic. And then if you double the power, then,
Yeah.
you're increasing the speed. One of the people associated with KubeCon, the event that I've been working on organizing, but that has been delayed, is Justin Parnell of Star City Games. And he's got a lot of tournament organizing experience, as you do, of course. And at these Star City Games Opens that he's done in the winter for the past 2 years, where he's tried to push Cube, he's made the final top 8 events for both of these things, a powered Cube draft. So I've talked about the same issue that we're chatting about now with him. From my understanding, his rationale for including power in the top 8, he thinks that it may lead to some unfairness, as power is sort of supposed to do. But a real good reason for him to include power is when people think cube, many people think MTGO vintage cube.
Mm-hmm.
They think Luis Scott Vargas cracking Black Lotuses and playing Moxen. And that's what people want of Cube, especially as spectators. That's a great reason to include power. Give the people what they want and expect of Cube.
Yeah, with me, the groundwork for this change was laid by the top 8 players. There's a lot of tournament veterans, a lot of really good players. It's sort of a common joke between them and me. It's like I'm saying, no, but it's all for you guys. And they say, no, but we're playing because you're organizing it. So it's sort of a catch-22.
Oh, yeah. That's great.
Because I always say that I always say to them, well, if you don't play, there is nothing. So in that sense, it's all for and by you. And they have some. Well, if I say outspoken champions for removing power, it sort of sets the wrong tone because they really made the distinction that I already outlined, where it's okay for a small event to have it, but when we're playing a 12-round tournament, then we rather have the power a bit flattened. It's also because of the 720 cards. If Justin has a final that is 360 with power and it's not used somewhere else in the event, because I think I remember it's sort of you draft Pauper during the day, and then if you qualify for the final, then it's powered, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. They only use that cube one time for that top 8 event. That's it. And it is 360 cards, as you say.
Yeah, well, that made perfect sense because then it's just a choice for the way the tournament is structured. I think it has to fit the tournament. I think for both our goals that works.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's great that you've got this long track record running this event and that you're continuing to tinker with it. So you're considering whether or not to include power moving forward. We've talked before about the fact that you've expanded the number of qualifiers, you've expanded the number of people in the final. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your experience organizing Big Cube event like this for 10 years now. I'd love to benefit from your experience as I'm just starting down the path to attempting to do the same.
I just at some point I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we had a 16-player draft day? At the time, I didn't have children yet, and I was just super into Cube. I mean, we had Cube days with 8 people where we just meet at 10 in the morning and then go home at 12 at night, having played 3 or 4 Cube drafts. So I was no stranger to just jamming it down with 8 people, stopping only for half an hour to go out for kebab or something. For me, the next step was more people. It's got to be more fun. But my mailing list was already, I think, 30 people around that time, and I didn't want to exclude people or decide who played this awesome 16-player thing. I had no idea it was going to be a tournament at that time. But that's sort of when the idea came. So I'm not just going to make it an open write-in because then what do I say to player 17? Because my reasoning was that who doesn't want to be in a 16-player cube thing?
Sign me up. I'm ready.
And that's when where the idea came from, to just have people qualify. And in the first years, we had you talked about that I was still changing things. I think I've changed something probably every year. And that's just because every time you run the event, you say, this could have been a bit better. At first, I ran qualifiers, and I also ran regular drafts. I mean, they were regular cube drafts, but they weren't qualifiers, and people scored points. So yeah, also had a points ranking, and I did the elo for everybody. So there also was a slot for the top ranked player. And of course, with such a small pool, persons already qualifying. I mean, people with a lot of points also had a high elo, so it was sort of the pool of players was not big enough for these 3 things existing side by side. At some point, it was unclear for people if something was a qualifier or not, which led to some feel bads. And then we went to a model where it was everything's a qualifier, and that's been working well. We had a top 4 where we had sealed. We played top 4. My favorite top 4 I think it took 4 hours. We had a Winchester 2-headed giant draft. And then the team that won, they faced each other in the finals and did a Solomon draft. I just really like the idea of having to work together to reach the finals. I would do it again, but it just took forever. And then we did the one drop cube, I think, for 5 years. Probably my favorite cube that I've built. And then for the 10th year was the first time that we had 32 players. And that was also because a fellow cube organizer in Amsterdam, Arjan Ang, he already approached me a year earlier, say, can't I do something for you? Because I also want to run a tournament, but I sort of don't want to run it next to yours because I think it's rude. Maybe we can join forces. And then a year later, we did that. And that's why we now have a 32-player finals.
Oh, yeah, that's sweet. So some of the qualifiers are running this other cube environment.
Yeah.
And I think you said that you even have qualifiers outside of Amsterdam.
Yeah, because I moved outside of Amsterdam. It's only a 20-minute drive. I'm meeting new Magic players here, and I even found some old ones that already moved here. So that's funny that I'm reconnecting to old players that moved to the same city.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's sort of I'm doing 8 in Amsterdam and 8 in Haarlem, and Arjan is also doing 8 in Amsterdam. But thinking about what you need to know most about organizing tournaments, looking at my experience with Arjan this past year, you have to let go of the desire to follow every game of Magic because you like people playing with your cube. You have to just run the tournament. The good stories, they will reach you anyway. You don't have the bandwidth or should want to have the bandwidth to process all the games and run a tournament. I don't mean the regular 8-person draft because there, if your game is finished and you want to watch the game next to you, it's fine. But if you're running, 20 plus people, just run the tournament.
How has your cube developed over the years? I know that you're always updating it. You've got this awesome star date system for numbering your cube updates, which is super cool. You're always tinkering with it. You've had it for many, many years now. What are some of the ways in which it's changed, and what are some of the ways that the experience of building the cube with the specific intention of having it be the main cube for a tournament, how has that impacted your cube design?
Well, not really, actually. It's sort of also, I don't even take it being powered under any extra consideration. I think it hasn't, the main goals have not changed at all in the past 10 years, aside from finding out the wedge shaped curve that I touched on. I still want to be more of a good cards cube, so I think the updates can come rather easy. I've done it the same the past 10 years. When a new set comes out, I automatically scan for the standouts and try to find underperformers I can cut for them. I did try some things where I would completely take out black or green aggro. Then as the cube grew, I started putting them back in because I don't think mono green is a real aggro deck, but if you're Gruul, then you need the 1-drop cards to be there. Changes like that are also driven by printings. Printing like Gravecrawler got me to sort of look at that aspect of black. Thinking about it, talking it out, I do realize something has changed. There was a long time where I would never look back at what was cut. I would only just put the new stuff in and just keep on moving forward. And I think for the past 2 or 3 years, I sometimes just do an overhaul of a section of a color because I want to highlight something, or because I feel some older card is suddenly viable or is primed to come back because of new printing. So that is something that has changed. I am afraid of tinkering with it too much. That's also why I don't go deep on archetypes or extreme design theory.
So you tinker with it often, but not many cards each time that you're tinkering with it?
No. It always starts with something that I want to include instead of something that I want to take out. It's also one of the benefits of 720 is that I can always find some underperformer.
I want to pause for a moment to reiterate that Black Lives Matter. People of color in the United States and elsewhere are structurally disadvantaged and face both overt and implicit racism. This is heartbreaking. This is unacceptable in a world that hopes its moral arc bends toward justice. It is for each of us to determine what sorts of interventions we are capable of to disrupt injustice. In the show notes, I provide a link to a site that offers a fine collection of ways that we might offer support, whether financial or otherwise.
Are there any particular cards that spring to mind that have been printed in the last year, let's say, that you've been especially excited about, that have maybe performed better than you expected?
There's this card from War of the Spark, Cruel Celebrant. Sort of an aristocrat's piece. It's white-black for a 1/2 vampire. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. I liked it. I think I like it so much because I found it so late. I had completely missed it. I even run Sir Conrad because I think I need all the variations of Blood Artist at 720 if I want to give it any sort of viability. I just stumbled across Cruel Celebrant. I think it was, a binder or a table that I walked by, and I was just like, how did I miss this card? And I think that's why I like it so much.
Oh, that's cool. I built a Ravnica extended cube for CubeCon. I built it at 360, and then with Jonathan Brostoff, we expanded it to 540, which was actually super tricky, because even though...
Ravnica Extended means all Ravnica sets? Just all 3 blocks?
Right, exactly, all 3 blocks. And it's great that there's 3 blocks, so there's a lot of cards to work with, but as you're well aware, not all of the mechanics make a ton of sense together. I mean, some of them do, but then other things...
How's Haunt working out?
Yeah, right. Haunt doesn't make any sense. Hellbent, like why am I trying to empty my hand? Doesn't make any sense with Unleash. Anyway, I wanted to support an aristocrats style deck, so Cruel Celebrant was a great addition to that cube. I think my choice would probably be Mu Yanling, Sky Dancer. We've talked about her, maybe. Have we talked about her on Twitter or something?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think she's great. She's 1 blue for Planeswalker. She's only got 2 starting loyalty. Her +2 is until your next turn, up to 1 target creature gets -2/-0 and loses flying. And then her -3 is create a 4/4 blue elemental bird creature token with flying. And then she's got an ultimate, which, whatever. I don't think I've ever done her ultimate. -8. You get an emblem with islands you control, have tap, draw a card. I think of Mu Yanling as an air elemental that costs 3 mana but has suspend 1.
Yeah.
She comes down and she can't downtick immediately because she starts on 2. So you have to uptick her once and she goes up to 4. And her uptick is a fine defensive uptick, particularly at 3 mana. She does a fine job at helping to defend yourself, defend herself, keep your life total at some reasonably comfortable level. And then if you've kept her from getting hit, she downticks and suddenly you've got a 4/4 flyer, which is a big deal. I like that card a lot. She's been a fun one.
Nice pick.
She's a good addition. But yeah, so many good cards lately.
It's almost a bit much, huh? I mean, with all the good cards recently.
Yeah, it's amazing. In my 540 card legacy cube I've been working on lately, I have 96 cards from M20 on. That is crazy.
That's a lot.
So this is definitely a very recent heavy cube. It's a cube that doesn't cheat very much. So not only does it not have power, but I don't permit any reanimation effects or other creature cheat type effects that cost less than 4. So that knocks out a bunch of the old, extremely broken cards as well, like actual reanimate and animate dead and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I just keep it all in.
Yeah, I do too. In Elaesis, in my 450 card cube that has higher power spikes.
It's 3. It's my main powered cube. It's the 1-drop cube, which is 180 cards, and I have a zombie versus humans themed cube. Also, an idea that I blatantly stole from Eric Klug. Yeah, I just love the idea so much of it being completely unbalanced. It's 40%, I mean, color-wise, it's 40% white, 40% black. So the rest just fills up the other 20. And it's supposed to be a team draft where you play zombies versus humans. The zombie players can pick human cards, but they cannot play them in their deck.
Huh. So they can only hate draft.
Yeah. And I think we did like 5 drafts, and the main problem is the zombies are just so much more fun.
Okay.
They have all the shenanigans, and the humans, they just run out some anthems and they try to win the game. So now I have some angels, they help out. Just to spice things up. But we never really got around to it because most of my play group just always says, yeah, it's fine, the zombie cube, but when is powered cube? When is it?
Right.
We need it.
That's cool. That makes it like the zombies versus humans thing is a good way of taking the cube concept and pushing it harder towards the board game kind of experience, thematic and.
Yeah, well, the imbalance there led me to put an color imbalance in my 1-drop cube, because it used to have blue. Blue is in there, but it's sort of a strange animal. I tried mill, and then people just, someone just takes your 1 mil 5 cards and just boards in 5 cards, and then you can't win. But then I changed it where I just run half the amount of blue cards of the other colors, and now it's just the good cards are left, and now most of the winning decks, they just splash a few of the blue cards. So there was a really big move there where you sort of remove it as a main color, and all of a sudden it's relevant.
That's interesting. I've done almost the opposite with exactly blue in my main cube. I'm not doing this right now, but I've experimented with adding a whole ton of blue cards because, especially when I had a play group, the complement of which was super gung ho about blue. And I mean, let's be honest, who's not super gung ho about blue? We all want to draft blue. People would just end up fighting for blue cards, and
I always take the red cards.
you take the red cards.
Yes.
Nice. That's good. Just beat them over the head with some lightning bolts. That's a good plan.
Well, I also feel completely outclassed with the scene that I mentioned with Pro Tour players, and I see people drafting decks with my cube that I couldn't even. I mean, if I could draft it, which I can't, then I can't pilot it.
Okay.
So,
Great. Well, that's super awesome, though. It's great to see what other people are
yeah.
doing with your
Yeah.
environment.
Sorry, I interrupted you. You said so you upped the blue count to more than the other colors because you had a crew that had a preference for picking blue
Yeah,
cards?
right. I tried adding like 20 blue cards or something at the expense of all the other colors.
It's strange how easy it seems, right? Huh? When you can just shave 5 of the other 4, and then you can expand. The impact on the other colors felt really small.
Especially in like your 720 card environment. I don't know if you've got everything perfectly balanced, but if you have 10 more of one color than another color, your drafters probably won't even notice that unless they're looking at the list,
No, well, I do, but I cheat. And it's sort of arbitrary. Also because I realize that at 720, no one's going to actually notice. All my colored sections are 90, but let's say Academy Ruins is blue, but Tolarian Academy is not. But the reasoning is that Academy Ruins costs blue, so you really need to be blue. And I put Shackles in blue, but I don't put Shrine of Burning Rage in red, and Cackler is red or something. And there's a few shenanigans going on to make sure that the numbers line up. But I think it's purely for cosmetic reasons that it's all 90.
Right. Yeah, it's aesthetics, and that's fine. Our format is called Cube. I think that it tends to encourage people to want to maintain balance in all sorts of different ways, including in numbers of each color that they're running, and that makes sense. But also, do what you want. What advice would you give somebody who was looking to build a cube?
I sort of wouldn't want to push anybody towards writing things out and then spending obscene amounts of money to get all the cards and then find out that things are not working. I would just, like I started, just find cards in your collection that you like. I would start small, just start at 360 just to get a feel for it. It's easier to fill the colors and to fill the curved slots. You can have 60 card sections and just 50-50 them. I wouldn't go too wild on extreme design the first time. You start with 360 cards and you have 8 sections, so you can run 45 card sections. I would just start running 23 creatures and 22 spells in each, just to have a starting point. Sure, you can make blue a little creature light and green a bit creature heavy. Of course, unless you have a big design idea, because the coolest cube I ever saw was a desert cube. You had to actually draft your basic lands in the packs because it was a harsh environment where you had to fight for your resources.
So, Thomas, what are some of the developments in Magic that you're most excited about lately?
I still think I should say power level, even though sometimes I'm a bit scared of where it's going. Sort of power upon power. We're sort of not oscillating anymore, I feel like they used to, because it was sort of a design strategy where they would lower the power level so they could raise it. And now I just feel it's going up and up. But I do feel that for Cube it's really good because, really good might be a bit overstating it, but I think it's fun that we're having inherently powerful cards, like the adventure mechanic. So I think we sort of moved away from the more contained abilities and more into generally powerful cards. And as a cube player, I really like those type of cards.
I basically don't play Arena at all. I've only played it a little bit. And the best of one model, I think, is I don't like it. I'm sure some people love it, and that's great. But best of one Magic isn't the way I want to play Magic, but a nice thing about it is that it has pushed Magic design towards increasing the number of modal cards that they print, because sideboards have become decreasingly relevant in the Arena realm. So I think that's helped give us things like adventures. So I'm totally with you. I love those modal cards. There's some real benefits to the best of one model for we cubers, even if we're not the target audience necessarily.
Well, I do think now with the companions, I feel like they got conspiracy in my regular Magic. I cubed with the conspiracies because I really liked what they were doing, and I thought it was neat and cute. And then the more I played with it, I just thought, I'm not playing Magic right now. You always get to go first, or you look at 14 cards before you start, or
Or you get a free 1/1 at the beginning of the game.
every land taps for rainbow. I mean, I tried a lot of them. We shaved off more and more, more and more. At last, in the end, we only had World Knit. That's the one where you can have no sideboard, but all your lands are rainbow. People just picked it up in pack 3 and still won the draft because they had perfect mana with some strange 5-color beatdown deck, and it was just not what I wanted the environment to be. I even picked WorldKnit once in a paper rotisserie draft. It was my first pick. It was I won the draft so easily, and I'm not even a very good player. And I think now with the companions, we're just there again.
Yeah, I played with those conspiracies too, and a bunch of them are hugely broken for sure. Advantageous Proclamation reduces your deck size by 5. For people who are newer to Magic, that doesn't sound like that big a deal, but
No.
having a 35 instead of a 40 card deck just increases the reliability of the deck by such a huge margin that it really is a huge deal.
Backup plan lets you see 2 7-card hands and you pick one.
Yeah, and then you pick one, right?
And then
Yeah,
you can
that's crazy,
mulligan.
dude.
Yeah. But even the one double stroke, you write a card name, and then when you cast that card, you can just copy it. Those even felt sort of normally. And you also have the one, I can't remember the name, the one where you choose a card name, and I don't know, we used to put slips of paper in the card, and you had it face down, and then you could play a card with any color of mana. So you could certainly, I don't know, Armageddon in your mono red deck, even though it's not that hard usually, but it's just the first example that I'm thinking of. I don't know what that says about me. But there I just totally dislike the whole gotcha aspect of I can cast this spell that I don't have the mana for it. What do you think about the companions? Do you also see them as conspiracies?
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison. The conspiracies I tried playing as well. I played a bunch of them and then I reduced it I had the same trajectory that you're describing. Honestly, people had fun with them. They made for really totally novel play experiences, but also people got tired of them pretty quickly and it didn't feel like we were playing Magic. Companions, they do feel quite similar, especially to the conspiracies that have requirements like, there's Hymn of the Wilds that says you can't cast instants or sorceries, but the first creature spell you cast each turn costs 1 colorless mana less to cast. That's like a Mox, where there's a deck building requirement. You can't have instants or sorceries, but it's like a Mox that you get to start with every single game, right? That you get in your hand at the beginning of the game. Yeah, hugely broken. And so the companions feel sort of similar to that. They've got these deck building restrictions, but you get to start with this thing every single game.
Yeah, well, I want to make clear that if I would still be drafting regular sets, which I don't because I've run out of Magic time, basically. And these days, I would rather not spend my Magic time drafting regular sets. If I sit down and I know that this is in the limited format, then I can have fun for a certain amount of period. I just don't want it in my cube, and I don't want it in my constructed.
I haven't drafted Ikoria at all.
You do draft regular sets normally?
No, I don't much. I try to go to the pre-releases, and then I'll usually draft a set like once or twice over the life of the set. So I'm no expert on retail limited. I enjoy doing it every once and again, but like you, I'm a family man. I got kids and job, and I do all this cube stuff, and there's only time for so much.
Yeah, well, that's I think now in 10 plus years, some people have been part of the crew for even before the Cubevitational started, because I think we just had Cube for, I think it was 2 years before I got this crazy idea that it should be a big tournament, and some of these guys I've known exclusively through Cube
Right.
for the past 2.5 years. I know little of them outside of Magic. Now that we're getting older, we actually talk more about life things. So I am getting to know some of them. They're not the people I call if I need to, I don't know, get a dishwasher up the stairs or something.
Uh-huh. Right. I understand that. I'm the same way. And then, of course, as we all do, I'm sure I've got plenty of friends who aren't at all involved in magic and just look at me askance when I start rambling about some cube thing or whatever.
Yeah. You know that I actually semi-routinely check out a blog or video of a subculture that I know nothing about for 5 minutes, just so I can be bombarded with terms that I don't understand to sort of reinforce how crazy all the magic slang is, and that people outside of magic don't understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, it kind of makes you more humble, maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
I get that at home too, because my wife definitely doesn't play magic. And she, like, one of the few card names that she's latched onto for some reason, I've got no idea why, is Palaka worm. So I'll come home from Cube Night and she'd be like, "So, how are those Palaka worms? Did you play a Palaka worm? Did you just trample all over him with a Palaka worm?"
No, my wife just got into it again a little bit. I have to say this right, because years ago I tried to teach her, but I didn't go about it the correct way. Let's just keep it at that. Now my son, he just saw the cards lying around, and now that he can read, he's sort of into it. Sometimes I come home and he's playing Magic against my wife. It's just really funny because I haven't played against my wife since I taught my son, but I think they've played like 10 plus games. They even text
Yeah,
me.
that's great.
They text me about, say it at work with a question. Say, did we do this right?
Yeah, judge. We need Thomas to be our judge from afar.
It's also really strange because to them, I'm sort of course, the Magic Rules god. And then when I sit with those other players at my cube who really know how to play, it sort of magnifies for me how extremely complicated Magic is.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, cube is just extraordinarily complicated, like orders of magnitude more complicated than standard is going to be, or something, where you've got a much more limited pool of cards and limited number of keywords and whatever. What's a common myth about cube, and why do you think it persists?
And one of the recent eye openers that I had, and that I think is a common myth, is running full cycles of non basic lands. I used to just peg a cycle. I said, okay, this is a cycle that I think is good enough for cube. And then I would just run all 10 of that type of specifically dual lands.
Right. So, like all the temples or something.
Yeah, or all the check lands, or well. And the reason I stopped doing that is because this is going to sound strange, but it was because in Modern Horizons we got the other
Horizon
talisman.
Canopy.
Yeah, we got the canopies and we got talismans, right? And now I sort of took the whole multicolor including the lands as a list. How do the dual lands in a certain color pair need to perform to further the goals of what the color pair is trying to do? So now some have man lands like Colonnade, and others have
Uh-huh.
fast lands like Blackleaf Cliffs. So yes, I do have some full cycles of the things most people think are objectively the most powerful, but other slots are sort of tailored to what the guild is trying to do.
Yeah, I like that.
Even though I'm really high on the filter lands and I've always kept all 10 in. But the reason that I mentioned the talismans also here is that some color pairs get just a signet, and some color pairs get a signet and a talisman, and there's even one color pair that gets neither, but they get an extra land. So it's sort of one big clockwork where I've tailored the land and the colored artifact mana to support what the guild is trying to do.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So Selesnya has neither signet nor talisman.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's you care least about artifacts, for instance, in
Yeah.
Selesnya. and you've got access to all the green ramp stuff anyway. That's cool. And then with the lands, right, you've got, so in Azorius, for instance, you have Celestial Colonnade, as you mentioned, but then you've also got like Irrigated Farmland, which is the cycling land from Amonkhet. And I love these cards. I hate that they enter tapped, but I love that they've got the basic land types. So they're fetchable, and then you can cycle them. So that seems like big game for Azorius. That makes a lot of sense. You can pitch the card, draw something else. Cantrips are real good in every deck, but in particular in Control.
The reason that I listed this as something that I thought was a myth is also the reason that I tweeted that I don't think the triomes are an auto-include for vintage powered cubes. I mean, for cubes running fetch and original dual lands. I think most people would, if they choose to include it, automatically run all 5. But I'm putting the blue ones in. I'm cutting, I think, 2 rainbow lands for it, because now we have fetchable semi-rainbow lands that also cycle. It's sort of like the irrigated farmland that you highlighted. I think that if you are in that type of deck, then that's exactly what you want.
Mardu wants its lands to enter untapped, darn
Yeah.
it. That's more important than the fixing, probably in most cases, or the ability to pitch the land or whatever. I mean, that's great, but I can see what you mean about not all of the wedges being equally interested in these tricycle lands. I'm testing all of them. As you know, I'm a big advocate for running double fetches. I break singleton just for fetch lands. This makes the stock of lands that have the basic land types on them go still up in value. So these are really quite good, but adding more and more lands that enter tapped is difficult. I drafted a deck the other day that was a control deck where it was basically blue-white, but it was splashing black and splashing green. It was splashing green for exactly Oko. It's like it's hard to say no to an Oko when it comes to knocking. So he was worth the green splash. Anyway, I ended up with maybe 4 lands that enter the battlefield tapped or something. And man, it's a real cost.
Yeah.
It's hard, even in a control deck, for a whole bunch of lands to enter tapped. You don't want to be playing that far behind the deck that's pressuring you. So I can see reservations about that, but I am pretty excited about the tri-lands, I gotta say.
Yeah, I really like them. I just wanted to combat the notion that all 5 were auto-includes.
Do you have a favorite cube or magic memory, Thomas?
This is a really old story from when we still cubed Chaos Orb. I mean, we actually flipped it. Okay, let me do a small introduction. This whole episode led to a lot of functional errata where we would just vindicate it. We tried hexproof breaking vindicate and all the different custom rulings because we got tired of the game within the game where if someone announces a chaos orb, can you still move your cards and all the non-magic rulings that would come with it. In the really early days, when we would just flip it, when it was announced you couldn't touch your cards, you had these games if someone hits that you was completely devastated. And then people caught on to the fact, okay, Thomas has the Chaos Orb in his cube right now, so we need to sort of plan for it. And my opponent, he had 2 creatures, and he put them a distance from each other that he thought was sufficient. And he had attacked me with one, so it was tapped, which of course means that it's wider than if it's untapped. I've been practicing my my flips, so I thought, oh, they are hittable. And I don't know if you flipped an orb before, but the main
Yeah.
the main trick
I'm
is
terrible and I don't practice.
okay. The main trick is not flipping but dropping. But because his one card was tapped, and because I managed to drop the orb diagonally, I touched exactly these 2 creatures with the tips of my Chaos Orb. And the look on my opponent's face was absolutely priceless because he was so convinced that he was prepared for the orb. To this day, that's why I still think it's my favorite. It's my favorite cube memory.
That's great, and I love it. So, Thomas, where could people get a hold of you?
I'm at Cubevitational on Twitter.
It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's been awesome to chat in person, so I really appreciate it.
Good talk.
for sure. We've talked so much over Twitter. It's a real pleasure to get to chat in person. One of my reasons for starting this podcast is a selfish one, which is that I want to talk to people whom I feel like I've come to know in the community on some level, but haven't had this level of personal interaction with. So this has been great. Thank you for being willing to do this.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. You're welcome.
My best to you and your family.
Yours too.